Okay. Welcome to Bihl Haus Arts and to the exhibit Nature on the Edge, curated by our good friend David Rubin. In conjunction with this exhibit, I'm so excited to be able to present to you Rachael Brown, Professor Brown. Let me see. Now I can't read this. I'm sorry. In the summer of 2014, Professor Brown was with the Visual Arts Department at South Texas College. Took part in a National Endowment of the Humanities Summer Institute on pictorial histories, the graphic novels of the Mixtec and Aztec. And from that research that she did that summer, she developed a perspective on those codices and on the artwork pre-contact, post-contact, and into the 20th century that puts together art, nature, and socioeconomy. And so we're going to see that develop here, literally before our eyes, in an incredible lecture that we're very excited about. So I would like to present to you Rachael Brown. Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much. It is a real pleasure to be here, and I'll try the mic. I'm not very mic friendly, but I'll try it. I don't even, is it on? I don't even know if it's on.
Tech support.
Tech support. Where are we? Oh, there's something there has to be fixed. Okay. Does that sound better? Am I loud? Oh, now I'm louder. Now I'm much louder. I can hear myself. Okay. So thanks again to Bihl Haus for inviting me. This was a watershed event for me to go and spend a month in Mexico last year and really get into the depths of the beginnings of art and society and its sort of interwoven qualities with the environment of Mexico. And so, especially with the ancient and modern Mixtec people, they were sort of one of the main foci, the focus of our institute last summer. And so when David and Kellen introduced me to their idea, Nature on the Edge, I thought, wow, this is really a fascinating way to see how does this idea of the interrelationship between nature and culture, art, and society, how does that work, with what we're looking at in the modern era. I guess the statement that got this all started was, when you lose environmental diversity, you begin to lose cultural and artistic diversity, and because they are uniquely interdependent on one another. So that's really where I was kind of thinking about bringing my talk into a little bit more focus, and also looking at the wonderful work that you see around you here at Bihl Haus. And I did, as I was ruminating over all of this, really see several connections. And so the connections that kind of bring the Nature on the Edge exhibit together with what I was studying last summer. 3 or 4 basic ideas. One is materials. What are the materials that an artist chooses to make their artistic statement? We often think of, art, it's a painting. But wait, is it just a painting? What's that painting made of? What's it on? What's the surface that it's painted on? What are the pigments mixed with? And more often than not, when we look at something and initially we just call it a painting, you really start looking at it and you realize, it's not a painting. It's actually a piece of wood that's been, had color added to it, or it's actually a print. So painting is kind of a word that we automatically use when we're talking about art, but there's really so much more to art than just a painting. So materials are important. Another thing that's very important is, of course, our imagery. Where does our imagery come from? And so the imagery that you see around you, this fantastic, evolved imagery of what happens when nature has things thrown at it and what does it evolve into, that's also something that's sort of, there's definitely a correlation to that in the work that I'm going to show you. Cycles, the idea that there are cycles in nature. There are many representations of cycles in the artwork that I'm going to show you. And so there's definitely, again, kind of this interesting correlation between the cycles of the work that we're seeing here and the cycles of the work that was done by the Mixtec and the Zapotec. And then finally also, the inspiration that we receive when we see something beautiful in nature, and how for many of us, it can actually evoke a spiritual response. I think that is also something that we see in some of these pieces. It's a sort of an evolving spirituality, but then that's also something that's very much rooted in the work that I'm gonna present to you today. So, in thinking about all of these things, let me introduce Oaxaca, Mexico. Did the slide advance? It's in here. Okay. These are all the people that I have to thank on the Oaxaca end. Lorraine Fletcher, George Shepard, they were the project co-directors. And we had a whole host of people who were amazing presenters. No, all of this knowledge did not just get in my head from me, sleeping on a pillow with a book under it. We had, in many cases, 3 to 5 hours of lecture a day. And then we had often at least 1 or 2 museum or archaeological site visits a day. So for 30 days, 30 museums, archaeological sites, visits to bibliotecas, the historical archives, that kind of thing. So first of all, and I've been visiting with some of you as you came in, so you already know where Oaxaca is, Oaxaca, Mexico. So for those of you who have already been there, this is a refresher. For those of you who haven't, Oaxaca is south? Close, right? Okay, I'm not from San Antonio, so I'm getting my bearings right. Oaxaca is south of here, a ways, about 900 miles from San Antonio. The valley, of course, is considerably closer to Oaxaca than San Antonio is. So it's almost due south of us. And if you can see on the inset map, it's roughly divided. Let's see. The eastern side is a little bit more heavily populated by people who are of the Zapotec traditions and culture. And you see on the, eastern side is Zapotec, western side is Mixtec. And also farther north you get, you have the Mixtec and several other indigenous groups. And so when I'm talking about the Mixtec and the Zapotec, who am I talking about? The Zapotecs are the people who arrived in the Valley of Oaxaca at least probably 2,000 years ago. But by the time they had established and worked through several sort of levels of society, they built this enormous site called Monte Alban around 500 BCE. So its main sort of flourishing period was around 500 BCE. So the Zapotecs were there first, and they established a great big huge empire. And curiously, when their empire ran out of resources, what do you think happened? When empires extend themselves a little too far and they use up all the resources around them, things stop working, and eventually somebody else comes in and takes over. Who came in and took over or started to share power? The Mixtecs. So they came in somewhat later, around 1000 CE. So this is, within the past couple thousand, 1,000 years. And they are the culture that developed this very, very sophisticated codex art form. So what you're seeing on the screen there at the top is a scene of Monte Alban, the remains of Monte Alban. We unfortunately don't know the Zapotec word for Monte Alban. That's the name it was given by the Spanish. And then the lower picture is a reproduction of a Mixtec codex. So again, what we're looking at is how does the art tie into the diversity of the region? What we see in Oaxaca is it is one of the most diverse, ecologically diverse regions of the entire Western Hemisphere. You have, if we go back to the map for just a second, Oaxaca is in a part of Mexico where you have a connection both from North and South America, which oddly enough is an east-west connection. And you also have a connection between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, because on the north side of Oaxaca, you just go downhill, and you end up in the Gulf of Mexico. And if you end up on the other side, the south side of Oaxaca, you end up in the Pacific. So it's really a very connected location for trade, and not just for human trade, but for plant trade, for animals. Animals and plants can move all over the place in Oaxaca too. All right, so Dr. Alejandro de Avila Blomberg was one of our presenters. He's the director of the Jardín Etnobotánico in Oaxaca. So the ethnobotanical garden there, it is a treasure trove. It's really amazing. It's right in the middle of town. And like Bihl Haus, it is a recycled location, which I love. I love recycled locations. I love it when we take an old building and we use its bones and we turn it into something new and fantastic. That's exactly what they've done in the center of Oaxaca City. They've taken this enormous ex-convento, this big convent, or actually it was a monastery, and they've turned it into an archive, a museum, and an ethnobotanical garden. And it also actually has a huge place that's just a computer lab for students of the city to come and sit and look out these gorgeous windows and work on their homework. So there's a little map of that. And some of the plants that we think of when we think of art might surprise you. I think to me one of the most surprising things was that maize, corn, is not really just something to be eaten. Corn is also very much a plant to use as an art form. Now a lot of these art forms are temporary, and that's something that we sometimes, I think in Western culture we have a hard time with temporary art. We think that everything, well, if I made it, it's going to last forever, right? No, not everything can be like that. And so art made with corn kind of acknowledges the fact that there are these cycles, that there are times to do things, that there are places that we do them, and that it's a temporary, beautiful thing, and then the next day it's gone, right? So what you're seeing in front of you, if you can see the bigger picture at the top, that is the Church of San Andres Cholula. We happened to get to Cholula the feast day of San Andres, and we thought there was a war going on because of all the fireworks. I mean, it was loud and really kind of scary, and most of us had terrible headaches by the end of the day. The festival is that, and I'll show you a picture at the end of the slideshow, La Virgen de los Remedios, the Virgin of Remedies, who lives spiritually in the church at the top of the Cholula hill or pyramid. She goes and visits San Andres on his birthday. So it's his saint's day, and so the big fireworks display was to make sure that the devil did not get into the church in the top of Cholula while the Virgin wasn't there, right? Okay, so that's the idea. It's also about who can throw the most fireworks, apparently, because there's a competing church on the other side of Cholula where, they have to throw just as many fireworks, right? But what do they do in the church in San Andres? They decorate it beautifully for the arrival of the Virgen. And what do they decorate it with? They decorate it with corn. So all of the decorations that you see laid out on the floor in that picture, all of the red and white zigzags and all of those little pictures, I think we probably see it more with Native American sand paintings, but those are corn paintings done with the corn in the same way. And in some places, it's the whole kernel, and in some places, it's the corn that's been powdered and dried, and also, I think, obviously, a little bit of added pigment to it. So the corn itself is something that's used as an art form. But of course, you also eat it, and you have this special relationship with corn as a person of the Mixteca Alta or of Oaxaca, because it was also first cultivated there. Corn goes back 5,000 to 6,000 years in Oaxaca. And actually, the state of Oaxaca and the state of Guerrero have a fight about who actually cultivated corn first, but I'm not going to get into that fight. And here you have Dr. De Avila Blomberg. He's also showing us teosinte, which is the original plant that corn comes from. Also, something that's kind of interesting interesting in terms of environment and art and economy in Oaxaca is that they have actually been very careful and considerate when it comes to modernizing their agriculture. Yes, they could grow so much more if they used the big machines, but the big machines would tear up their environment, and they're aware of that. And so in the 1970s, when big companies went in and said, hey, we'll provide you with all of these machines if you'll grow our corn, Oaxaca said, oh, that's so kind of you. Thank you so much for that offer. Yes, we've learned so much from you. No, thank you. We don't need your big machines. And so what's kind of interesting is the picture where you can't see the cows' heads and they're a little blurry. That's because I actually took that from the bus. As we were driving through the Mixteca Alta, there was a farmer plowing his field with 2 oxen or cattle, doing it the traditional way, because that way they can keep their small fields. They can farm those microclimates with the kind of plants that grow in those specific areas. And so again, there's this very close relationship between the product and the land and the people. Another product that is sort of a specialty in Oaxaca, although of course they are grown in other parts of actually around the Pacific Rim now, is something called the tree gourd, a jicara, or sometimes it's also called a calabaza. And so what this is a large gourd that grows on a tree. And these bowls that can be made out of the outer part of the gourd are also, again, part of the traditions, the artistic traditions of Oaxaca. One of the traditions that relates to corn is that it's apparently best, it's considered best to plant your corn when you're putting your seed corn in the jicara first. There's like a relationship between the jicara and the corn that makes the corn happier if the corn gets planted out in the jicara. Right? But we do know these things, like in gardening. I mean, what do you plant next to tomatoes that makes the tomatoes happy? No? No? If you grow basil and tomatoes, they love each other. They grow together. They're happy. And I think also squash is one of those things that grows happily next to it. So there are these kind of plant relationships that the Mixtec observe and use. And I haven't, been down there long enough to know what all those relationships are, but there are apparently lots of them. So anyway, these wonderful decorated boards, and they're also, on the other end, associated with other traditions. One of the images you see, there are very brightly painted jicara bowls that are used for drinking a very special drink that's made in Oaxaca called tejate, not tecate. Some of you might know what that is. No? Okay, some of you don't, that's okay. It's beer. Anyway, see, I'm used to teaching 18 through 25-year-olds, so, I have to see how many of my 18-year-olds know what a tecate is. So, the tejate is a corn-based chocolate drink that's made with cocoa flowers and some other things, and it's very frothy and beautiful, and so it's served in those. Another kind of a common thing are the plants that are used for weaving. So again, they grow in a lot of places, but the Mixtec and the Zapotec are still very, very adept at finding these plants where they grow and using these to augment their local economy. So you have on one side the Oaxacan Saval Mexicana, which is a sort of a short growing palm kind of a plant, and on the other side you have the Tilancia, which kind of creates a more soft, like a fiber that's used for cord and twine and things. But again, these traditions go back, and you'll see up at the top there, the codex image of 2 people having an important meeting on top of a mat. In the Mixtec culture and in most Mesoamerican cultures, nothing important happened without mats. Something about putting a mat down and having your meeting on top of a mat meant we're being civilized about this, we're meeting in this space, and we're having a conversation, or we're performing an important ceremony. And so the fact that you see things presented on mats in codexes, often it's actually a marriage ceremony or some sort of a treaty that's being discussed, and the mat is actually part of the visual signifier that there's something important going on there. And, you know, again, you can walk into the market early in the morning, and the older gentleman there drinking his coffee quietly is selling mats that have been made in exactly the same way for probably 2,000 years. I also got an opportunity to talk to this wonderful woman in the market in Tlaxiaco, who's just standing there and talking and making baskets just as fast as you can possibly imagine. I can't talk and draw or write or do any of those things. I'm not one of those kinds of artists. But this lady, she was fantastic. She was talking about how she learned the tradition and all of the different shapes and sizes they make, and how, well, yeah, the plastic, it's more pliable and it's this and that, but she really still prefers using the old stuff because when it breaks down, you can put it in the garden and it's gone. And that doesn't happen with the plastic ones. When they make them with plastic, they stick around and they just look ratty and ugly. And so it was interesting. Again, she and her, you know, the people of the Mixtec culture are making decisions about, well, okay, we know plastic is good and cheap and it's going to last longer in some ways, but it's also going to last longer in the bad ways. And so they still sell the traditional fiber as well as the plastic. And they come in all sorts of kinds of fun little shapes and sizes, and I'm sure many of you have seen things like this. I think the first one of these I saw was from when my grandparents went to Mexico when they were young, and they would bring back little things like this, you know, just little pocketbooks and things. So they've been made for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they're great for carrying around, you know, small things or your pocketbook, basically. Now, here's kind of an interesting material that, again, I'm sure some of you know quite a bit about this. But cochineal is a little bug. It's a scale insect, and it lives off of prickly pear cactuses. So you see a prickly pear cactus, and it has these little fuzzy white things on it. If you squish them, this dark purple-red juice comes out of them. So that's the cochineal color. And the Mixtec, the Zapotec, figured out how to ranch these little bugs. They learned how to not cultivate the bugs because it's a bug, so it's not a plant. So you cultivate it when you domesticate a bug? I don't know. Can you really domesticate a bug? Well, they figured out how to contain the bugs and get the bugs to grow and move the bugs around from plant to plant so they wouldn't kill the plants, but the bugs would propagate. And this, of course, was very useful for the Mixtec because cochineal, the color to make purple and red dyes, and I know this is kind of a small picture down here at the bottom, but you can see the gentleman who was displaying this to us was mixing, he was sort of using his arm and squishing the cochineal on his arm, and then he'd add a dab of lime juice to it, and it turned that bright orange color. And then over here, he put some of the cochineal, and he added a little bit of cal, a little bit of white powder, and he mixed it with that, and he got this gorgeous purple color. And so mordanting the cochineal raw with either an acid or a base, of course, makes it turn other colors. And when the Spanish saw that, when they got to Mexico, hold the presses. Because of course, what are the royal colors of virtually every court in Europe in the 1500s? Red, purple. They're always looking for something to make crimson with. And the crimsons that come out of natural dyes in Europe just don't have the holding power of cochineal. So this is kind of an interesting artistic and economic turning point for this part of Mexico. Because when the Spanish, of course, got to Mexico, what we now know as Mexico, during the Entrada, one of the questions that they apparently asked, and they asked the Mixtec, well, who are you unhappy with? And the Mixtec had just been conquered by the Aztecs 40 years before that. 1480, the Aztecs conquered the Mixtecs. So in 1520 plus, when the Spanish then made contact with the Mixtecs, And the Mixtecs say, you know what, the Aztecs, they haven't been making us happy. They've been slaughtering hundreds of thousands of us, you know, and this is not a good situation for us. And also the Spanish realize, hey, these are the ones who know how to do this thing with the cochinelle bugs. We could never do this on our own. Well, what is the economic proposition that happens? The Mixtec, you can prove that this is land that you've owned. You know how to do this very unique thing with this product that's going to make us a lot of money in Europe. So, you know what? Maybe you all can stick around. You don't seem like you're going to be so much of trouble, right? And, of course, what happens with the Aztecs? There aren't any, right? I mean, virtually all the Aztecs are gone. So this is a very interesting thing because I think, you know, when I was younger in college, we were sort of told that everybody got obliterated. You know, there were no native peoples left in Mexico. And that's actually not the truth at all. The Mixtec, by and large, were, I don't want to call it successful, but they survived. They survived the entrada, and they were able to do that partially with the artistic materials that they were able to produce. So here you see the farming, and you see the little tubes. That's what they actually use. They sort of corral the cochinelle bugs in those little tubes and move them from plant to plant, get them all situated. A whole variety of other materials that are used also for traditional plant dyeing, and these beautiful carpets, of course, that they weave out of the native dyed. They use some native wool. They're not really thrilled with their own wool, so they do actually import merino wool, which I thought was kind of interesting. They want to make a carpet that's going to last, and so they import the wool that they need. Another place where you see the plant-based dyes are in the embroidery that's done. This traditionally was done with a fiber called ixtle, which is the smaller fibers. These come from maguey plants or also the tilancia. But that has also sort of fallen out of favor for cottons and silks. And so most of the embroidery that's done now in Mexico is with cotton and silk. But much of the dyeing that's done is dyeing with the native materials. And the woman who's sitting on the ground using the backstrap loom in the orange and pink down here, she actually taught one of her younger nieces. This is a piece that she made, and you can tell that it's a learning piece because it starts with something really simple and geometric and symmetrical, the turtle shape, and it ends with the much more elaborate danzante shape, so the figure with the headdress. So these are the kinds of things that they teach the girls. They're practicing and they're working from a simple to a more complex design, and it's still very much part of the culture and how they know, you know, this is how we're going to support ourselves until you decide to go off to college. Codexes, the tomb artifacts show how important weaving was back then and how it continues to be this day. You have a figure, the top figure is holding out two implements. One of them is a batten, which is also the long, skinny tool that's down at the bottom. And that's what this woman is using, Cristina is using as she's weaving on the backstrap. She's using this large, flat piece of wood to pull the weave tight towards her. And so it's kind of interesting. Tomb 7 is a big, important tomb in Monte Alban. And for a really long time, they couldn't figure out what it meant and what were all these strange things in the tomb. How do I say this and not be too politically incorrect? It was the 1930s, and all the archaeologists who were looking at it were mostly men. And then one day, a woman looked at the artifacts, and she said, "Oh, silly, well, this is a woman's tomb. Those are weaving battens, and that crystal cup that's so unusual, it's a cup for spinning. If you have one of those distaffs for spinning your wool, you need a little cup to put the bottom of the distaff in so it doesn't spin all over the place. And this woman, obviously, very, very important, had a crystal distaff cup. So it's kind of interesting how also the art gives us a perspective on all genders in art and in culture. Another place where the plant-based dyes are used are on the wonderful imagery of the alebrijes. Now, the alebrijes are a little bit, controversial. The modern alebrijes have not been around that long. They really are sort of a folk art product that has been developed by the people of Oaxaca. And, well, how many of you have at least one alebrije in a folk art collection? Yes? I mean, they can be really, really small, little cute, little painted guys like this, right? Or they can also be massive and huge and gorgeous. And of course, there is a tradition for the Zapotec for the fathers to carve wooden decorated animal forms for their children when their children are born. And it's sort of like the idea of a spirit animal. So there may be a link there to what those ideas that go together. Or it could just be that this is a very savvy population who figured out, oh hey, if we make and paint these really colorful, beautiful animals, wealthy Americans are going to come down and buy them and display them probably in their houses. So can we fault them for that? No, absolutely not. They figured out their own economy. Ceramics is another one that's kind of interesting. The ceramics, of course, have changed very drastically from the archaeological record to the modern record. But of course, the clay is still the native clay of Oaxaca. Traditionally, they were very beautifully painted, what we call polychrome clay, but that doesn't sell. What sells, and Carl and I were talking about this beforehand, right? What sells is something that looks like the Navajo black pottery that started being produced by Maria Martinez in the 1930s. And so when the Oaxacan artists saw this, they thought, we can figure that out. And they started making it too. And so now that's what sells. The polychrome, you hardly find any polychrome modern, unless it's reproduction work in Oaxaca. But they're really, they're very adept at making this stuff that sells to the new elite, right? The people who come down and, oh, what beautiful artwork. Let's get some of that and put it on the mantle. And what you have here is a tripod polychrome piece, and then down below the codex showing, again, probably some sort of a ceremony where the couple are drinking tejate, the foamy chocolate corn drink, out of a similar tripod. It even actually has the little feet that are the little animal heads, if you look really, really carefully. So. Cycles. This is another very interesting thing that comes up both in the artwork of the exhibit here, as well as the work that we see coming out of Oaxaca. The Oaxacans, the Mixtec in particular, were very big on documenting. We don't normally think of Mesoamerican cultures as being, or many people are not aware of how important documentation was to them. But they have very elaborate documents. What you're seeing here is an example from the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca. And that particular document, although it's one of the later documents, is a document of a much earlier cycle. And this cycle is an epic journey of two great heroes who kind of go on this long journey in order to establish a new place for their predecessors to exist. And who are those predecessors? They are the Mixteca, right? So the Toltecs kind of give way to the Mixtecs. And these documents were produced actually in the early 1500s so that the Spanish were able to see that the Mixtec people, we have our own history, we wrote all this stuff down, we own this land, we claim this as our own. And when the Spanish saw the kinds of documents that the Mixtec were putting together, they said, oh yeah, this is just like a European birthright. Well, and you're saying it held up in one of your courts of law. Yes, say the Mixtec, it held up in our court. So it means that somebody owns this. Well, then I guess it works for us too. And that's almost unheard of anywhere else in the New World, that the Spanish would take an indigenous document and let it hold water. So there are a lot of examples of these. One of the other codexes we looked at was the Codex Natal. These are reproductions. But again, these epic journeys, these cycles that show confrontations and we've had to battle the sky people, and we're going to have to battle them again. It's sort of like a primer almost on it's going to be one of these epic battles, and it's going to end up in this ball game. And this is what's going to happen, and it's going to happen again, so you have to get ready for it. It's very interesting that those kinds of cycles, and cycles of birth and death, also come up in these codexes. A lot of it does have to do with, in a sense, kind of a reincarnation. And I think we also see that in a lot of the imagery here. We have the animals, where we have the animal shown as a skull, but then it's also shown in living form. So there's all of these very different things, the evolution that's going on in some places. So there's a lot of kind of interesting things. There's also just the imagery itself, all of the animals in the imagery. I showed you a little while ago the alipipes, and in all the codexes, you have these fantastic animal attributes that are given to people. They're wearing animal headdresses and all of that kind of thing. And again, we have a lot of kind of the hybridity or the evolution kind of look to a lot of the pieces here. And in particular, what I love, the cards at the back, where you have all of these sort of evolved and morphed little animals, they really make me think of a lot of the codex images, because a lot of the codex images are kind of these people who are morphed with animals because they have the qualities of them. Again, another mapa that's showing the sort of the cycle and the sense of ownership property. Last, one thing that I want to briefly approach is this sense of also how, when we look out at nature, it inspires us. I don't think a single person could say that they've never been moved by a vista or a sunset. I think that's happened to everybody. Everybody has gotten tears in their eyes at some point in their life because they've looked out and just thought, oh my goodness, it's so beautiful, right? It's nature, it's so beautiful. And so there's this spiritual awe that also comes with looking at the natural world around us. And some of these are beautiful. I mean, the works of art that are in this exhibit, the quality and the detail and the intricacy, that to me is beautiful as an artist. And how they're put together. It mirrors this idea of how it's all put together and how that's a beautiful and a spiritual thing. So what you're seeing here is in the Mixtec culture, in the Zapotecs, they didn't necessarily just have one big pyramid. They actually have what's called a temple, patio, altar complex. It's three little things that go together, and it's not one big giant thing. And this is usually placed on a location that has some sort of special alignments to something unique and wonderful, a vista, a holy mountain, a sacred spring, something that's in the landscape. And so again, the documentation of this in the codexes, and this is again, there's a little inset from the later, the Tolteca Chichimeca, it's showing this idea of Santo Lugar, the holy face of a location, the spiritual essence of a location. The Mixtec actually have a different word for it, the Yu'un. And it's not hard to find these places still pretty obviously in existence. Here you have a church that is built next to two gigantic trees, but you can see the tree, and then you look right down next to the tree, and there's a little white church next to the tree. That church is 3 stories tall. The tree is about 7 stories tall. So this is Santa Maria de la Asunción del Tule, and Tules, is that a saying up in San Antonio? Oh, it's way out in the Tules? No, nobody says that here. Okay. Way out in the Tules means it's way out in the swamp. It's way out in the, out there in the wetlands, right? Because tules are cattails. What grows next to tules? Apahuete, which is a Montezuma cypress, right? So this tree is a Montezuma cypress. It's over 2,000 years old. And when the church was built in the 1600s, Father Bartholomew, someone or another, commented that there was a platform there that the Native Americans had created for their own temple. This is just one little tiny piece of the tree. I say one little tiny piece, it's about 8 feet by 8 feet. But you can see that the tree has this very interesting growth on its trunk. And it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see a face there on the tree, right? Okay, so that's a perfect example of a yu'u, this idea of the holy aspect, of the spiritual aspect of that place coming up out of it in the form of this tree, right? And you can also see the Google map of how big the tree is compared to how big the building is. It's a huge tree. Another location, San Pedro Topiltepec. This was probably one of my personal favorites. We got up there on a misty morning, very, very quiet, and looked at the very simple facade of this church that was built in the 1550s or 1560s. And so we're looking at the facade, and it's pretty simple, and it has a few little elements that show how it's connected to the cultures before and the cultures of the colonies, of the colonial era. And then I turned around and looked off into the distance, opposite the church, and saw this rocky outcropping coming out of the mist. And if you look at, I also took a little piece of the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca and turned it this way, so that you can see the profile of the Santo Lugar, right? So this is, again, the church is being directed towards that holy site because that's where the platform was before the church was there. And the Mixtecs really, they would rebuild their pyramids, or not pyramids, but their temple patio altars every few generations anyway. So when the Spanish got there and said, oh, well, we're going to show you how to build this new kind of thing, it's a church, the Mixtec were ready to try something different because they've been doing the Aztec thing for 40 years and they weren't happy with that. And so, okay, well, the Spanish thing is this thing called the church. Okay, let's build it and see what happens. It's only going to be around for a couple of generations anyway, right? So they built these churches facing the same direction as their temples and their patios and their altars. They're, traditionally, Catholicism has everything on an east-west axis. All of this stuff is north-south or whatever it needs to be to face the Santo Lugar. And actually in the original temple platform, I don't know if you can see that little blue circle very well, but in that is a little carved human face. So it's even kind of telling you, look the opposite, look the other direction, and you'll see something interesting. Yan Huitlan, huge church. Oh my gosh, I thought suddenly we're in Europe. It's gigantic, beautiful stone church. I mean, they're all beautiful, but this one is really huge. And it's, again, you see it for miles. You're thinking, where are we going towards? This huge place out in the middle of the monte. At one end of it, I believe it's actually the south end, outside the apse, which is where the altar is, there is a spring house. So there was a sacred spring. And on the spring house, there are the remains of a relief of a great hero or warrior. And if you can kind of see it's unfortunately very indistinct and not in good repair. But again, if you look through the codexes, you'll see figures very much like it in the codexes. How does this align? This spring house that has something to do with the great hero. It aligns with that beautiful kind of symmetrical point of the mountain of Anunye, which is another one of these points of great spirituality. And it's aligned exactly, if you look at the Google map, it's aligned exactly between this spring and the sacred mountain, right? So what are people building in terms of, they're building these buildings. The building is the art form, right? And the building is the art form that is acknowledging the greater, purpose and the spirituality of the land. And so those two things together are really something that's pretty magnificent. I think the one that's probably best known is at Cholula, which is one of the first pictures I started. This is here at the end. Cholula is a huge, it looks like a hill. It's actually an earthen pyramid. It's one of the very earliest pyramids that we know of. And it's built all completely out of dirt. And then they sort of packed it in and it had walls and it was a garden. And the church that was on the top, or that is on the top, was added quite late. It's actually not a colonial church. It's from I think the early 1900s, late 1800s. But Cholula is a very central place in the document. You see the picture there of the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca. It is the place where the Tolteca Chichimeca came from, and they stopped in Cholula, and then they decided, okay, where do we go from here? And they kind of made their plan from there on out. On one side of the hill of Cholula, there's a spring house. And it's also documented that Cholula had a spring coming out of it, and it's one of the reasons why it was a spiritual location. And why did they build all of this stuff? Well, on the other side, there is the volcano, Popocatépetl, and his bride, Iztaccíhuatl, which you can't see in this picture. I'll show you in just a second. But back in the distance is the Virgin of Remedies church on top of the pyramid of Cholula. And in the foreground is the church of San Gabriel. That's the rival church to San Andres. And all of these things, again, face towards the setting sun during the summer solstice. And where does the sun set? Between Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. And what's on the back side? The spring. So again, there's this very conscious idea of the artwork of construction being focused on, wow, let's take this beautiful, natural, spiritual thing and amplify it by making this amazing architectural site. So there's a lot of creativity that goes into, how do you build something over a spring? Well, Mr. Bihl figured it out. But it's one of those really amazing things. There are so many forms that art can take. And whether it's something that you can put, on a wall in a gallery, or whether it's something that you can climb up and completely lose your breath climbing. How many of you have been to Cholula and climbed on Cholula? Yeah. I don't know why that one was like, am I ever going to get up there? I don't know. But it really is. It's this fantastic sort of synergy between the environment, what the people think of as important in terms of how it connects with their traditions, and also how it augments their economy. Again, people go to Cholula because it's a tourist site, and they keep some of those traditions alive because they know it's going to improve their economy. So all of that kind of fits together, and the creativity is also part of that. So, to conclude, these were a couple of wonderful kids that I ran into at one of the mercados, and they had a new thing that they were trying. They had experimented with some origami, and they had figured out that you could take the plastic foil potato chip bags and fold them up and make them into containers and wallets, and instead of using the native plant-based weaving materials, they were using those. And so here they had their own little place in the market that they were set up, and they were selling these things. And it was interesting because they weren't just selling them to tourists, they were also selling them to other Mixtecs. They were selling them to other local folks who were thinking, oh yeah, hey, you know what, for a couple of pesos, that's gonna work for a while, that's what I need. And also, if somebody were, God forbid, asking you for all your money, and you pull a folded wrapper out of your pocket, what's going to look more delicious to the person wanting to take your things? A nice leather wallet or a plastic wrapped, folded piece of trash, right? So it's kind of interesting. It's like camouflage for your money. So here these kids are a continuing part of this tradition. We talk to them, do you want to go to college? Yes, I want to go to Stanford. Well, what do you want to do after that? Well, I want to study business. I want to do this. I probably want to work in Oaxaca or a bigger city for a while. Well, what do you want to do eventually? I want to move back here and have a family and live in the Mixteca Alta. They, yes, they know about America, but they're very, they're careful. They know that it's not all land of plenty up here, right? And that what they have there, it's simple, but it's good. So it's pretty interesting. And look how simple it is. I mean, there's still, taking all of their food and bringing it to the market. It's, we have our farmers market. Oh, we're so progressive. Well, we've been doing it for thousands of years. So. All right, thank you so much. I know that was a little longer than I expected it to be. And if you have any questions, I could try to answer them, or maybe somebody else in the audience can. Anything you're still curious about? Or, yes.
I'm sorry I'm late, but I enjoyed it.
Oh, well, thank you. Glad you were able to join us. Anyone else? Anybody? Yes.
I have a comment and a question. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I wanted to add something. I'm a professor of Latin American cultural studies and specializing in syncretic religion, so this is my focus. And the corn is used for eating and for doing art, but the most important function of corn is that it is a sacred plant. And los hombres de maíz, people in southern Mexico, from Spain, I think from Mexico and Guatemala, consider themselves the children of corn.
Yes.
So everything that has to do with corn is sacred, and these other things are derivatives. Also, it could never be put in a plastic bowl, it has to go into another plant, an organic thing. Everything is very connected, and the same thing with the platforms, for example. Those platforms were used for ceremonial dances and ceremonies, and the Spaniards always built upon them just to cover, and maybe people go to the same place, even if there was a temple there, of course, like everywhere, in Midland, everywhere else. But my question is, you said that there is a botanical garden downtown, and the convent has been converted into some kind of a study center. Is that the convent that is next to the plaza?
Yes.
Because it used to be a hotel. Plaza Nostra.
Yeah.
So it doesn't exist anymore?
There are at least two really big plazas. There's the big plaza that's downtown next to the Mercado, or close to the Mercado. This one is up a little bit farther. This is I think it's Santo Domingo.
No, I was actually there when the museum was dedicated, and the governor, the president of Mexico at the time, and the archbishop, and everyone was there, and I was doing some research. Happened to get invited. It was amazing. When that space opened up, it's a little bit up from the city. Yeah, it was never a hotel. Yeah, it was never a hotel. It was actually an archive since the 1920s. They began collecting materials there, and then they moved the archive that was part of the city, which was downtown. They moved that archive up to Santo Domingo. It's a fabulous, one of the best archives in all of Mexico.
So it's Santo Domingo?
Yeah.
And the other,
Yeah, it's amazing. They were just starting the botanical garden when I was there, and I have been back.
It's just a few blocks. It's down the same street from Benito Juarez's original. There was like his estancia that was also kind of turned into a school that was up higher up in town.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
the university, the print shop is
right,
across the
exactly.
street.
So it's up there. But yeah, it's been used for many things, but I don't think that part of it was a hotel.
Okay, that's a different one.
Yeah.
The other ones.
Good. Yes.
Is it also where the Mission Gold is kept?
Where?
The Mission Gold is kept.
Yes, yeah, the Tomb 7 of Monte Alban that everybody raves about, that Alfonso Caso found in the 1930s. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And then they some of it was hopefully, well, they did recover some of it because after some of the tombs were looted, the other workers were paid more to literally guard it with their lives. So I mean, it was they realized that they missed out on a lot when they lost that treasure trove. So yeah, and they also, back in the 30s and 40s though, their archaeological methods were primitive, and so when we go back and we study what was found in the 30s and 40s, there's always big pieces of the puzzle missing because things that really would be helpful to have are, aren't around. So, anybody else? So, well, thank you so much. It really has been a pleasure.